Today we will bring you a romantic love story, so let's get started. Don't forget to subscribe to our channel so you don't miss any meaningful stories. The grand ballroom of the Crescent Hotel shimmered under the glow of crystal chandeliers, the air thick with the scent of expensive perfume and the clink of champagne glasses. Ava Collins wove through the crowd with practiced grace, her hands steadying a silver tray of appetizers. Her heart pounded, not from the weight of the tray, but from the sense of being out of place in this world. At 26, Ava was a freelance art teacher, scraping by to cover her mother's mounting medical bills. Tonight she was here at the desperate request of her friend Lily, who had begged her to cover a shift serving at this elite gala. The money could buy her mother another month of treatment. Ava's dress was her own creation, stitched together from scraps found at a thrift store. The soft cream fabric hugged her frame, its simple lines elegant but unable to hide its dated charm. She had spent hours sewing it, hoping it would blend in among the glittering gowns and tailored tuxedos. But as she moved through the sea of Manhattan's elite, she felt their gazes, some curious, most contemptuous. Ava kept her head down, her wavy brown hair loosely pinned and focused on her task. "Excuse me, girl," a haughty voice cut through the hum of conversation. Ava turned to face Clara Vanderbilt, a socialite with platinum hair and a red gown that screamed wealth. Beside her stood Sophia Langston, her smirk as sharp as her emerald earrings. Both were tabloid regulars, their family names synonymous with power. Clara's eyes raked over Ava's dress, her lips curling. "Did you dig that outfit out of your grandmother's attic?" Nearby, the crowd tittered, heads turning. Ava's cheeks burned, but she forced a polite smile, her grip tightening on the tray. "I made it myself," she said softly, hoping to diffuse the moment. "Made it?" Sophia's laugh was loud, drawing more eyes. "Sweetie, this isn't a craft fair. You look like you're auditioning for a period drama." She stepped closer, accidentally bumping Ava's tray. A glass of red wine tipped, splashing onto Ava's dress. The crimson stain spread like a wound, and Ava froze, her breath catching as the room's attention zeroed in on her. Clara gasped theatrically. "Oh, how clumsy! I hope that's not your only dress." Her mocking tone cut like a blade, the laughter that followed slicing deeper. Ava's hands trembled, the tray wobbling. She wanted to vanish, to escape the prying eyes and whispered judgments. But something inside her sparked. She wasn't a nobody to be trampled. Straightening, Ava met Clara's gaze, her voice calm despite the tightness in her chest. "It's just wine, Ms. Vanderbilt. Unlike some things, like manners, it can be washed out." A ripple of surprise passed through the crowd. Clara's smile faltered, her eyes narrowing. Sophia opened her mouth to retort, but before she could, a new presence silenced the room. The air shifted, heavy with authority, as David Blackwell entered. At 32, he was a legend, a billionaire who dominated headlines with ruthless deals and enigmatic charisma. His tailored black suit hugged his broad shoulders, his dark hair swept back, and his gray eyes scanned the scene with icy precision. David's gaze settled on Ava, taking in her stained dress, her defiant stance, and the vultures circling her. He approached with purpose, the crowd parting like water. Clara and Sophia stepped back, their confidence wavering under his stare. Without a word, David pulled a monogrammed silk handkerchief from his pocket, worth more than Ava's entire wardrobe. He placed it in her hand, his touch firm yet gentle. "Use this," he said, his voice low and commanding. Then, turning to face the room, he slid an arm around Ava's waist, pulling her close. His next words rang out, clear and unshakable. "She's in Hua, my wife." The ballroom fell silent. Champagne glasses froze midair. Clara's jaw dropped, and Sophia's eyes widened in disbelief. Ava's heart stopped, her mind reeling. Wife? She barely knew this man, having only seen his face in magazines. His hand on her waist was steady, but his eyes glinted with something, amusement perhaps, or a challenge. The crowd waited, breathless, for an explanation, but David offered none. Instead, he guided Ava to the center of the room, the handkerchief still clutched in her hand. Whispers erupted, a frenzy of speculation. Blackwell's wife? Who is she? That dress? Ava's legs threatened to buckle, but David's presence anchored her. She glanced up at him, her voice a whisper. What are you doing? He leaned down, his breath warm against her ear. Saving you, he murmured. Play along and they won't touch you again. Ava's pulse raced. She didn't know why David Blackwell, a man who could have anyone, had claimed her as his wife. But as Clara and Sophia stared, their faces a mix of shock and envy, Ava realized she had a choice: shrink back or step into the role this stranger had thrust upon her. She lifted her chin, her fingers tightening around the handkerchief. Whatever game David was playing, she wouldn't be the one to crumble first. The chandeliers above seemed to burn brighter, casting Ava in a spotlight she'd never sought. The night was just beginning, and with David's arm around her, she felt the weight of every eye in the room. For the first time, she didn't feel small. She felt powerful. The air outside the Crescent Hotel's ballroom was cool, a stark contrast to the stifling heat of the humiliation Ava had just endured. She pulled David Blackwell into a shadowed corner, the silk handkerchief still clutched in her trembling hand. The din of the gala faded, leaving only the rapid thud of her heartbeat. Strands of Ava's brown hair had come loose, framing her flushed face as she glared at the towering man before her. His sharp gray eyes met hers unflinching. What was that? Ava hissed, her voice low but fierce. You can't just declare I'm your wife in front of everyone. I don't even know you. David leaned against the marble wall, his relaxed demeanor infuriating her further. A faint smile flickered across his lips, as if her anger amused him. You were drowning in there, he said, his voice smooth as velvet. If you didn't want to be hurt more, you needed a shield. I gave you one. A shield? Ava narrowed her eyes. You lied to the entire room. Do you realize what you've started? David's smile widened, but a calculating glint flashed in his eyes. Let me play your husband tonight, he said. And if you agree, maybe a bit longer. It's a small price to keep vultures like Clara Vanderbilt at bay. Ava's stomach twisted at Clara's name. The memory of wine staining her dress, laughter ringing in her ears, made her clench her fists. But David's proposal was insane. She opened her mouth to refuse, but he raised a hand, cutting her off. Hear me out, he said, his tone shifting to calm authority. My stepmother, Margaret, and the Blackwell Enterprises Board are pressuring me to marry a woman of their choosing. A marriage to secure alliances, not for love. I need a way to hold them off. You need something too, don't you? Money, perhaps, to cover your mother's hospital bills? Ava froze. How did he know about her mother? She studied him, but David's face revealed nothing. Lily told me, he added, as if reading her mind. Your friend, who couldn't work tonight. I always research those around me. The invasion of her privacy stung, but Ava couldn't deny the truth. Her mother's cancer treatments were draining her dry. The $200 she'd earned tonight was a drop in the bucket. David stepped closer, his voice lowering. Play my wife for a week. Convince Margaret and the board I'm taken. In return, I'll pay you $50,000, enough to cover your mother's bills for months. $50,000. The number echoed in Ava's mind, a lifeline she couldn't ignore. But the idea of pretending to be this man's wife, stepping into his world of wealth and deceit, terrified her. And after a week, she asked, her voice barely a breath. We part ways, David replied simply. Cleanly, no strings. Ava's mind spun. She thought of her mother, frail and pale in her hospital bed, still smiling through the pain. She thought of Clara's sneer, the way the elite looked at her as if she were invisible. This was a chance to secure her mother's future. And maybe, just maybe, to prove she wasn't a nobody. But it was also a dangerous game, where she could lose more than her pride. Fine, she said at last, her voice steady despite the storm within. 1 week, but don't expect me to enjoy it. David's smile returned, this time with a hint of approval. Good, let's make it official. When David's sleek black Rolls-Royce pulled up to his sprawling Upper East Side mansion, Ava's nerves were taut as piano wire. The estate was a fortress of glass and stone, with towering columns and perfectly manicured gardens, a far cry from her cramped Brooklyn apartment. David led her inside, his hand lightly at her back, a gesture both possessive and performative. The grand foyer was filled with people, staff, advisors, and a woman who commanded the space as if it were hers. Margaret Blackwell, David's stepmother, stood at the base of the staircase, her silver hair elegantly pinned. Her designer dress and gleaming pearl necklace exuded aristocratic poise, but her cold blue eyes fixed on Ava with unmasked disdain. "David, darling," Margaret said, her voice dripping with false sweetness. "Who is this guest?" David didn't hesitate. "This is Ava, my wife." His tone was casual, as if discussing the weather. He pulled Ava closer, his arm like steel around her waist. "We've kept it quiet until now, but it's time everyone knew." The room fell silent. Margaret's smile froze, her eyes narrowing as they swept over Ava's wine-stained dress and unassuming appearance. "Your wife," she repeated, her voice laced with skepticism. "This girl?" Ava's cheeks burned, but she lifted her chin, meeting Margaret's gaze. "Pleased to meet you, Mrs. Blackwell," she said, her voice calm but firm. She wouldn't let this woman intimidate her, not after surviving Clara and Sophia. Margaret's lips tightened, but before she could respond, another figure approached. James, David's assistant, was a wiry man in his 30s, with sharp features and a subtly resentful demeanor. "Sir," he said curtly, "the board is waiting in the study. They'll want to know about this development." David nodded, but his eyes lingered on James, a flicker of suspicion passing through them. "Tell them I'll address it tomorrow," he said. "Tonight, my wife needs rest." James's jaw clenched, and Ava caught a dark glint in his expression. A secret, perhaps, or a grudge. He gave a curt nod and left, but the unease he left behind lingered. Margaret regained her composure, her smile returning like a mask. "Well, Ava, welcome to the family," she said, her words dripping with insincerity. "I'm sure you'll find our world enlightening." As Margaret swept away, Ava's stomach knotted. She glanced at David, who was watching his stepmother with a predator's focus. "She doesn't believe you," Ava whispered. "She doesn't have to," David replied, his voice low. "She just has to accept it." The next morning, Ava awoke in a guest room larger than her entire apartment. The bed was cloud-like, but she'd barely slept, haunted by her decision. She was no longer Ava Collins, the art teacher. She was David Blackwell's wife, at least for the next 7 days. David had arranged for a wardrobe to be delivered, and Ava reluctantly chose a simple navy dress, its understated elegance a stark contrast to her homemade gown. As she descended the staircase, she heard voices from the dining room, Margaret's, sharp and commanding, and another familiar and venomous, Clara Vanderbilt. Ava's heart sank. She paused outside the door, catching Clara's voice. "She's a nobody, Margaret, a waitress playing dress-up. David's making a fool of himself. And you." Margaret's reply was calm but icy. "Don't worry, Clara. If this is David's game, it won't last. You're the perfect match for him, and I'll ensure he sees that." Ava's hands clenched. Clara, who'd humiliated her, was Margaret's choice for David. The realization hit like a slap. She wasn't just pretending to be David's wife. She was a pawn in a larger war, where Clara was already plotting her next move. As Ava entered the dining room, both women fell silent. Clara's eyes widened, then narrowed, her lips curling into a smirk. "Well, look who it is, the blushing bride," she said, her voice saccharine with malice. "Enjoying your fairy tale while it lasts?" Ava forced a smile, her voice steady. "It's only just begun, Clara. I wouldn't want you to miss the ending." Clara's smile faltered, but Margaret's gaze was frigid, assessing. David appeared at Ava's side, his presence a quiet storm. "Clara," he said curtly, "I didn't know you were invited." Margaret interjected, her voice smooth. "Clara came to discuss the gala's charity auction. She's very invested in our family's future." David's hand settled on Ava's shoulder, a silent claim. "Good. Then she'll be pleased to know Ava will attend the next board meeting. As my wife, she has a stake in our future." The room crackled with tension. Clara's face flushed, and Margaret's smile stiffened. Ava's pulse raced, but she held firm, meeting David's gaze. His eyes glinted with approval, but also a warning. This was only the beginning. As they left the dining room, Ava's mind reeled. Clara had spread rumors. She overheard whispers of gold digger and fraud among the staff, and James, with his cryptic glances, seemed to know more than he let on. Ava was in deeper than she'd imagined, and $50,000 suddenly felt like a small price for the danger she faced. David paused in the hallway, turning to her. "You handled that well," he said, his tone softer. "But Clara and Margaret won't stop. Are you ready for what's next?" Ava swallowed hard, her resolve hardening. "Do I have a choice?" His smile was faint but genuine. "Number, but you're not alone." For the first time, Ava wondered if David Blackwell was more than a cold billionaire playing a game. But as James watched them from the shadows, his expression unreadable, she knew one thing for certain. This week would test her in ways she couldn't yet imagine. On the third morning of her role as David Blackwell's wife, Ava stood before a mirror in the opulent guest room, feeling like an imposter in her own skin. The emerald silk dress she wore, one of dozens delivered from high-end designers, clung to her frame, soft and flawless in a way that felt alien. She smoothed her brown hair, trying to recognize herself, but the reflection seemed to belong to someone else. David's world, with its marble walls, million-dollar oil paintings, and scrutinizing gazes, was suffocating. She told herself, 5 more days, 5 days, and I'll return to my real life. Ava kept her distance from David, appearing only when necessary, shared meals, polite nods to staff. She feared that letting herself get too comfortable would blur the line between truth and pretense. But David seemed determined to keep her from fading into the background. He constantly drew her into his spotlight, as if she truly belonged here. It both unnerved her and made her heart skip a beat. That evening, Ava entered the mansion's formal dining room, where a table was set as if for a state banquet. The crystal chandelier's light glinted off gold-rimmed porcelain plates and gleaming silver cutlery. Margaret Blackwell sat at the head, opposite David, exuding the authority of a queen. Beside her was Clara Vanderbilt, her red lips curved in a knowing smirk, joined by a few board members, middle-aged men with eyes sharp as knives. The air crackled with tension, as if Ava were stepping into an arena. "Welcome, Ava," Margaret said, her voice sweet but icy. "I hope you're finding your new circumstances comfortable." Ava took her seat beside David, feeling his hand brush hers under the table, a discreet gesture of reassurance. "Thank you, Mrs. Blackwell," she replied calmly. "I'm learning to adjust." Clara sipped her wine, her eyes glinting with malice. "Adjust? Oh, that must be quite a leap from, what was it? Serving hors d'oeuvres or teaching kids to finger paint?" The others chuckled softly and Ava felt her cheeks flush. But she wouldn't let Clara win so easily. "I teach art," Ava said, meeting Clara's gaze, "and I find it far more meaningful than spending all day picking lipstick to match a dress." The room fell silent for a moment, then a low chuckle broke the tension. From David. He tilted his head, his eyes sparkling with pride. "She doesn't just teach art," he said, his voice deep and steady. "Ava has a gift for making things beautiful, even dull conversations." Margaret's lips tightened, clearly displeased by David's defense of Ava. Clara gripped her wineglass, but before she could retort, a board member, Mr. Grayson, a silver-haired man with a voice like thunder, spoke up. "Ms. Collins, if I may, what do you see as your role in Blackwell Enterprises? A wife of David's would surely contribute, no?" "I'm not here to run the company," Ava cut in, her voice clear. "But I believe a strong business isn't just about profits. It's about how it treats its employees and community." David shared details of the company's charitable projects. "I'd like to contribute by supporting art programs for underprivileged children, giving opportunities to those who lack them." Grayson raised an eyebrow, visibly surprised. Margaret coughed lightly, masking her irritation, but David squeezed Ava's hand under the table. "That's a brilliant idea," he said warmly. "We should discuss it further." Clara let out a mocking laugh. "How touching, but I'm afraid the board cares about practical matters, like partnerships with the Vanderbilt family, for instance." She glanced at Margaret as if sharing a secret. Ava smiled faintly. Practical doesn't mean soulless, Miss Vanderbilt. A painting can inspire a generation, just as a deal can shift a market. Both are investments, just expressed differently. The room fell silent again, this time with a grudging respect. David looked at Ava, his gaze softer, as if seeing her anew. Margaret swiftly changed the subject, but Ava knew she'd scored a point. As dinner ended, David whispered in her ear, "You were incredible. They didn't see that coming." The next day, Ava found a quiet corner in the mansion's garden, where vibrant red roses glowed under the sunlight. She sat on a stone bench, calling her mother on her old phone. Her mother's voice was weak but filled with love. "Are you okay, Ava? I know you're worried, but you're stronger than you think." Ava smiled, her eyes stinging. "I'm fine, Mom. It's just, everything here is so different. I feel like I'm playing a part that isn't mine." She paused, then continued, her voice wistful. "But I still dream about the art studio, Mom. A free space for the kids in our neighborhood. I want them to know they can create something beautiful, no matter where they come from." "You'll make it happen," her mother said. "I see the light in your eyes when you talk about it. Don't let that place make you forget who you are." The call ended and Ava sat there, watching rose petals fall. Her mother's words were a reminder. Despite this charade, she had her own purpose. She wouldn't let David's world consume her. That afternoon, David found Ava in the mansion's library flipping through an art book. He paused at the door, watching her silently. But before he could speak, an elderly maid, Mrs. Rosa, entered, her eyes red-rimmed. Ava set the book down, concerned. "Mrs. Rosa, are you all right?" Rosa shook her head, her voice choked. "Today's the anniversary of my son's passing. He died 5 years ago. I just can't bear it." Ava stood, gently guiding Rosa to a small table. She grabbed paper and a pencil from a nearby shelf and placed them before her. "When I'm sad, I draw," Ava said softly. "It doesn't have to be perfect. Just let your feelings out. Want to try?" Rosa hesitated, but with Ava's encouragement, she began sketching. Clumsy lines of a small house where she'd lived with her son. Ava sat beside her, offering gentle guidance, and slowly Rosa smiled through her tears. "I've never done this," she said, "but thank you, Miss Avenue. You're special." David, standing in the shadows, felt his chest tighten. He'd never seen anyone in this house, not even his mother when she was alive, treat the staff with such genuine care. Ava wasn't just smart or beautiful. She had a heart he couldn't stop thinking about. When Rosa left, he stepped forward, his voice low. "You just did something no one here ever has." Ava started, her cheeks flushing. "I just wanted to help her. It's not a big deal." "To Rosa, it's everything," David said, his gaze locked on hers. "And to me, it is too." But not everything was calm. That evening, Ava opened her phone and found a viral social media post. An anonymous account, clearly tied to Clara, had shared a candid photo of Ava in her wine-stained dress at the gala, captioned, "David Blackwell's secret wife? Or just a gold digger in Cinderella's rags?" The comments were brutal, calling her a fraud and Blackwell's new toy. Ava shut her phone, her heart pounding. Clara was striking, and she wasn't alone. Margaret was surely behind it, and perhaps James with his cryptic glances. The public was buzzing, tabloids piling on. Who is Blackwell's mystery wife? David Blackwell weds a waitress? David found Ava in the sitting room, her face pale. He sat beside her, his voice firm. "Don't let them shake you. They want you to run. But you're stronger than that." Ava looked at him, her eyes glistening. "I don't know if I can do this, David. Your world, it's too big, too cruel." He took her hand, his fingers warm and steady. "My world is only worth something with you in it," he said, his voice rough. "Stay, Ava, for me." His words sent a tremor through her heart, but they also scared her. She was sinking deeper, not just into the game, but into David Blackwell himself. And with Clara and Margaret circling, Ava knew this battle was only beginning. On the 4th day of her role as David Blackwell's wife, Ava felt caught on the edge between reality and illusion. Every moment with David, his unexpected touches, the way his eyes lingered on her, stirred her heart, but she reminded herself it was all a contract. 1 week, $50,000, and then she'd walk away, back to her simple life. Yet David seemed intent on making things more complicated. That morning, Ava found a white box on her bedroom table, embossed with the logo of a renowned fashion house. Inside was a silver evening gown, shimmering like moonlight, its elegant cut designed to accentuate every curve. A note was tucked inside, written in David's bold hand. "For tonight's gala, I chose it because it reminds me of you." Ava's fingers grazed the soft fabric, her heart pounding. She'd never worn anything so luxurious. But what unsettled her more was the thought that David had personally selected it. The cold, contract-driven man had taken the time to think of her. She shook her head, trying to dispel the warmth creeping into her chest. "Don't be foolish, Ava. It's just part of the act." Tonight's gala was an internal Blackwell Enterprises event where David would meet major partners in the board. He'd asked Ava to attend, not as a fake wife, but as someone truly by his side. "They need to see us as a unit," he'd explained that morning, his tone calm but his eyes heavy with meaning. "And I want you there." That evening, Ava stepped into the Blackwell Towers Gala Hall, feeling as if she'd entered another world. The silver gown flowed over her like water, sparkling under the lights. Her head was held high, her brown hair cascading in soft waves, and her mother's simple necklace, the only jewelry she wore, served as a reminder of her roots. When she appeared beside David, the room seemed to hold its breath. He, in a sharp black tuxedo, took her hand, his gaze sweeping over her with unmasked admiration. "You're more beautiful than I imagined," he whispered, making her cheeks flush. But the moment of grandeur didn't last. As Ava and David moved through the crowd, she spotted a familiar figure, Clara Vanderbilt, in a fiery red gown, standing among a group of shareholders. Clara's eyes narrowed at the sight of Ava, her smile sharp as a blade. Ava tightened her grip on David's hand, feeling like a lamb among wolves. The gala proceeded smoothly for the first few hours. Ava played her part, smiling, engaging in light conversation with partners, and trying not to falter under the board's probing stares. David stayed close, introducing her with a pride that left her unsettled. But she knew it was all a facade until Clara decided to strike. In the midst of a group of shareholders, Clara raised her wine glass, her voice ringing out with saccharine malice. "It's wonderful to see David so happy with his new wife," she said, emphasizing wife like a taunt. "But I hear it's just a short-term contract, isn't it, Ava? 1 week, $50,000, and then you'll be back to your serving job?" The room fell deathly silent, heads turned, eyes zeroing in on Ava. She felt the blood drain from her face, her heart hammering. How did Clara know about the contract? Who had told her? Ava glanced at David, but he was staring at Clara, his eyes blazing with cold fury. "Clara," David said, his voice low and dangerous, "you're crossing a line." "Oh, I'm just stating the truth," Clara replied, smiling like a cat with a caught mouse. "She doesn't belong here, David. She's just a temporary toy, and everyone knows it." Ava's throat tightened. The gazes around her pierced like needles, stripping away her Mrs. Blackwell veneer. She wanted to fight back, to scream that she wasn't a gold digger, but the words lodged in her throat. Unable to bear it any longer, she let go of David's hand and fled the hall, Clara's soft laughter chasing her like a shadow. Rain began to fall as Ava burst outside, the cold droplets soaking into her silver gown. She stood under the building's awning, her breath shaky, tears mingling with the rain. She felt foolish for thinking she could ever fit into this world, even for a week. Clara was right. She didn't belong here. She was just a poor girl playing a role she could never truly inhabit. But then she heard footsteps, and David appeared, his tuxedo drenched, but his eyes burning. "Ava!" he called, his voice rough. He strode toward her, grasping her shoulders, heedless of the rain. "Why did you run?" "Because she's right," Ava cried, her voice breaking. "I don't belong here, David. I'm not your wife, and everyone knows it. I'm just part of a contract." David's grip tightened, his eyes locking onto hers. "I don't care who you are," he said, his voice firm, almost desperate. "I don't care about the contract, or Clara, or anyone in that room. But I don't want to lose you, Ava. Not tonight, not ever. His words cut through her like a knife. Ava stared at him, rain streaming down his face, softening the sharp edges she'd always seen. She wanted to believe him, to believe something real could exist between them. But the memory of Clara, of the scornful stares, made her step back. You don't understand, she whispered. I can't do this. She turned to leave, but David caught her hand, pulling her back. I understand more than you think, he said, his voice lowering. 4 years ago, I loved a woman. I thought she loved me, but she only wanted my money. When I found out, she didn't just take my wealth, she took my trust. Since then, I locked my heart away, only believing in contracts. But then you came along, Ava, real, stubborn, and unafraid to challenge me. You make me want to believe again. Ava stood frozen, the rain chilling her skin, but her heart burning. David, the seemingly untouchable man, was laying bare his wounds. She wanted to say something, but he leaned down, pressing his forehead to hers, his breath mingling with hers in the rain. Stay, he whispered. Even if it's just for the contract, stay. She didn't answer, but she didn't push him away. They stood there in the rain, two wounded souls finding each other in a fragile moment. Ava didn't know if she could trust David, but she knew one thing. She didn't want to leave him, not now. Meanwhile, at the gala, the shareholders buzzed over David's sudden absence. A multi-million-dollar deal awaited his signature, but he'd abandoned it all to chase Ava. Clara stood in a corner, wine glass in hand, her triumphant smile fading as she realized David wasn't returning. She turned to Margaret, whispering, He actually cares about her. We need to do something before this goes too far. Margaret nodded, her eyes like ice. Don't worry, Clara. I have a plan. That girl won't be here for long. The rain continued to fall, and in the darkness, Ava and David stood together, unaware that a greater storm was looming. On the 5th day of her role as David Blackwell's wife, Ava felt her heart teetering on a dangerous precipice. After the rainy night when David bared his past wounds and begged her to stay, the line between pretense and reality began to blur. She tried to keep her distance, reminding herself this was just a contract. 1 week, $50,000. And then she'd leave this lavish world behind. But every glance, every touch from David shook her resolve, as if he were drawing her into a story she couldn't escape. That morning, Ava received a call from the hospital. The nurse's voice on the other end was gentle but surprising. Ms. Collins, I'm confirming that a substantial payment has been made to your mother's medical account. There's no sender listed, but it covers 3 months of treatment. Ava froze, her hand tightening around the phone. She knew only one person could have done this, David, yet he hadn't mentioned it, hadn't boasted or used it to bind her. His silent act of kindness warmed her chest, a feeling she didn't dare name. She found David in the mansion's library, poring over a stack of documents. Morning sunlight streamed through the window, highlighting the sharp lines of his face. Ava paused at the door, taking a deep breath before speaking. You paid my mother's hospital bills, didn't you? David looked up, his expression calm but with a playful glint in his eyes. I don't know what you're talking about, he said evenly, though the corner of his mouth twitched upward. Don't play coy, Ava said, stepping closer. No one else could have done it. Why didn't you tell me? He set the documents down, standing and closing the distance between them, his presence tall and commanding. Because I didn't want you to feel indebted, he said, his voice low. You've been under enough pressure, Ava. I just wanted to make it easier for you to breathe. His words washed over her like a wave, pulling her into an emotion she couldn't resist. She wanted to thank him, to ask why he cared so much, but all she managed was, Thank you, David. Her voice trembled slightly, and when he smiled, a genuine smile, not the calculated one of a billionaire, her heart skipped a beat. That afternoon, Ava decided to escape the mansion to regain some balance. She visited a small Brooklyn cafe where she'd once worked as a server before teaching art. The place was unchanged, filled with the aroma of roasted coffee and soft jazz. As she stepped inside, a familiar face lit up. Ava! Tommy, a former co-worker, rushed over to hug her. The blonde, blue-eyed barista, always warm and openly fond of her, grinned. You back to work? Or just visiting? Just visiting, Ava said, smiling, comforted by the familiarity. She sat at the counter, chatting with Tommy about old times, quirky customers, long night shifts. Her smile grew genuine, and for that moment, she felt like the real Ava Collins, not Mrs. Blackwell. But the moment shattered when a figure appeared at the door. David strode in, his black suit immaculate, his eyes scanning the room like a hawk. When he saw Ava laughing with Tommy, something sharp and primal flashed in his gaze. He approached, each step carrying an invisible weight. "David," Ava said, surprised, standing. "What are you doing here?" "I was passing by," he said, his tone calm but his eyes fixed on Tommy, who took a step back, clearly intimidated by David's presence. "I thought you might want to have dinner with me." Ava frowned, sensing the tension in his voice. She turned to Tommy, offering an apologetic smile. "Thanks for the chat, Tommy. I'll stop by again soon." Tommy nodded, but his eyes lingered on David, as if sizing up a rival. As they left the cafe, Ava confronted David on the sidewalk. "That wasn't just passing by, was it?" she asked, crossing her arms. "You followed me." David met her gaze, not denying it. "I didn't like the way he looked at you," he said bluntly, his voice low and edged. "And I didn't like the way you smiled at him." Ava blinked, stunned. "Are you jealous?" David stepped closer, so near she could smell his woody cologne. "You can smile at anyone, Ava," he said, his voice rough. "But when you smile at me, make it real. I want that more than anything." His words left her speechless, her heart pounding. She wanted to explain that her smile for Tommy was just the ease of friendship, nothing more. But David's eyes, a mix of hurt and longing, silenced her. She nodded, saying softly, "I'll be real. But you have to be too, David." He studied her for a long moment, then nodded, as if sealing a new pact between them. That night, after a long day, Ava and David sat on the mansion's balcony, overlooking the city's twinkling lights. The air was cool, a bottle of wine on the table between them. No Margaret, no Clara, no board members, just the two of them, feeling for the first time like they didn't need to perform. Ava sipped her wine, a rare sense of calm settling over her. "What was it like growing up?" she asked, curious. "I mean, before you became David Blackwell?" David gave a soft, bittersweet laugh. "Lonely," he said. "My father was a workaholic. My mother died when I was young. I grew up in big houses, but they were always empty. I learned to protect myself, to keep everyone at a distance, until I met someone, and she shattered my trust." Ava listened, her heart aching as he spoke of the woman who'd exploited him. She realized that beneath his cold exterior, David was a man scarred, much like her. She set her glass down, her voice gentle. "I used to think I'd never trust anyone either," she said. "My dad left when I was little, and my mom gave up everything to raise me. I always thought I had to be strong, to do everything on my own. But sometimes, I just want someone to be there, so I don't feel so alone." David looked at her, his gaze unusually soft. "You're not alone anymore, Ava," he said. "Not while you're here, with me." She smiled, and for the first time she let herself dream. "I have this dream," she said, her voice wistful, "to open a free art studio for kids in need, a place where they can paint, create, and feel like they matter. I want them to know their circumstances don't define them." David leaned closer, his eyes alight. "You'll do it," he said, "and I want to help, not because of the contract, but because I believe in you." In that moment, under the city lights, they weren't a billionaire and a teacher. They were just David and Ava, two people sharing wounds and dreams. When he took her hand, their fingers interlacing tightly, Ava felt a connection deeper than any contract. She knew she was falling for him, and that filled her with both joy and fear. But in the shadows, Clara and Margaret were plotting. A text from Clara to an anonymous account read, "Find the contract. Once it's exposed, she'll crumble." Ava and David's game was growing more perilous, and they didn't know their time was running out. On the 6th day of her role as David Blackwell's wife, Ava woke with a gnawing sense of unease. The previous night, on the mansion's balcony, she and David had shared moments so genuine that she couldn't deny the feelings growing in her heart. But every time she thought of loving him, fear surged. Fear that it was all a dream, and when the contract ended, she'd be left with a broken heart. She told herself, "One more day, I'll get through this." That morning, Ava was in the dining room, reading an article about community art programs on her phone, when James, David's trusted assistant, entered. He placed a stack of documents on the table, his eyes cold and unreadable. "Ms. Ava," he said evenly, "you might want to check social media. It seems you're the center of attention." Ava frowned, opening the app on her phone. Her heart stopped as she saw the headline on a tabloid site. "Blackwell's fake wife. $50,000 marriage contract exposed." The article included a scanned copy of the one-week marriage contract between her and David, detailing every clause, from the $50,000 payment to the no emotional attachment commitment. The comments below were vicious. "Gold digger unmasked. Blackwell's such a fool. She's just a puppet." Ava felt the blood drain from her face. She looked at James, her voice trembling. "Who did this?" James shrugged, but a faint smirk tugged at his lips, as if hiding a secret. "I'm just the messenger," he said, then left, leaving Ava with the sensation that her world had just collapsed. Within hours, the scandal exploded. Major outlets jumped in, quoting Clara Vanderbilt, who declared with a triumphant smile, "I suspected from the start. Ava Collins is unworthy of David, and now everyone sees she's nothing but a fraud." Margaret Blackwell, in a televised interview, sighed dramatically. "I'm heartbroken that David was manipulated by this girl. We'll handle this within the family." Ava sat in the mansion's sitting room, her phone buzzing incessantly with messages from friends and former colleagues. Some were concerned, but most were curious or mocking. She felt stripped bare before the world, every eye judging her. She wanted to run to David, to ask how this happened, but he was at the office managing the crisis with the board. She was alone, and for the first time since entering his world, she felt truly isolated. At Blackwell Enterprises headquarters, David sat in a boardroom, facing an irate board of directors. Shareholders hurled sharp questions. "You've made the company a laughingstock. Is this contract real?" David maintained an icy facade, but inside he was seething. He didn't care about the press or the board. His only thought was Ava, where she was, how she was feeling. "We'll handle this," David said, his voice steely. "But I warn you, anyone who deliberately hurts Ava will pay a heavy price." When the meeting ended, David summoned James to his office. "Who took the contract?" he asked, his eyes like daggers. "Only you and I knew where it was kept." James kept his expression neutral, but his hands twitched. "I don't know, sir," he replied. "Perhaps Ms. Ava let it slip." "Don't lie," David cut in, his voice dangerous. "I'll find the truth, James, and if you're involved, you'll regret it." David didn't know that James had been ensnared by Clara. The previous week, Clara had approached James at a bar, exploiting his resentment toward David, the man always in the spotlight while James toiled in the shadows. With a hefty sum and a promise of a high-ranking role at a Vanderbilt company, James had handed over the contract, believing he'd remain undetected. But Clara, with her cunning, ensured all blame pointed at Ava, not James. Ava couldn't stay in the mansion a second longer. She packed a few belongings, slipped into an old sweater and jeans, and left without a word to anyone. She took a bus to her small Brooklyn apartment, where the smell of old paint and street noise felt familiar. Stepping inside, she saw her mother, Helen, seated in an armchair, a blanket draped over her. Though weakened by illness, her eyes lit up at the sight of her daughter. "Ava," Helen said, opening her arms. Ava rushed to her, hugging her tightly, tears spilling over. "I saw the news," Helen said gently. "Tell me what's happening." Ava poured out everything. About the contract, David, the real moments they shared, and the pain of being judged by the world. When she finished, Helen stroked her hair, her voice warm. "You've fallen for him, haven't you? Your eyes say it all." Ava shook her head, but more tears fell. "I'm not allowed to, Mom. It was just a contract, and now everyone thinks I'm a fraud." Helen took her hand, squeezing it. "They can say what they want, but I know who you are. You're the girl who sewed dresses from scraps, who taught kids to paint, even without money for brushes. You're stronger than they think, Ava. Don't let them take that away." Her mother's words were a small flame, igniting a new resolve in Ava. She wiped her tears standing. "I'll keep teaching," she said, her voice firm. "No matter what they say, I won't hide." The next day, Ava walked into her art class at a public school in Brooklyn. The students, children from low-income neighborhoods, looked at her with curious eyes. The news had reached them, and a few whispered behind her back. But as Ava began the lesson, guiding them to paint their dreams, she felt alive again. Each brushstroke, each smile from a student reminded her she wasn't the gold digger the press described. She was Ava Collins, and she had worth. But the scandal didn't relent. A group of reporters waited outside the school, cameras flashing as she stepped out. "Ms. Collins, what do you have to say about the contract with Blackwell? Are you going to apologize?" Ava held her head high, saying nothing. But her heart was heavy. She knew she couldn't keep living in David's world, not when it made her a target. In the Blackwell mansion, David sat alone in the library, the dim light casting shadows on his face. A newspaper with a headline about Ava lay before him, but he didn't read it. He stared into space, replaying every moment with her. Her smile as she taught Rosa to draw, her dreamy voice talking about her art studio, her eyes in the rain. With painful clarity, he realized he loved her, not because of the contract, not because of the game. He loved her because she was Ava, authentic, resilient, and unlike anyone he'd ever met. He picked up his phone, calling Ava, but she didn't answer. He knew she'd left the mansion, and her absence made the sprawling house colder than ever. David clenched his fist, resolute. He would find her, fix this. But first, he needed to uncover the traitor. In the shadows, James received a text from Clara. "She's run away. Now's the time to push David toward you." But James didn't respond. A chill ran through him, as if David was already closing in. And he knew if the truth came out, no one could save him from David Blackwell's wrath. On the 7th and final day of the contract, Ava woke in her small Brooklyn apartment, feeling like a survivor of a storm. The scandal over the one-week marriage contract still dominated the headlines, with paparazzi shots of her outside the school and vicious titles like "Gold Digger's Downfall" or "Blackwell Refuses Comment." But Ava had resolved not to hide. She slipped into an old sweater, tied her hair up, and prepared to head to her art class, where her students awaited. No matter how the world judged her, she wouldn't let them steal what made her feel alive, teaching and creating. Meanwhile, at Blackwell Enterprises headquarters, David Blackwell faced one of the most pivotal days of his career. The board had called an emergency shareholder meeting, and the atmosphere in the boardroom was taut as a bowstring. Margaret Blackwell, with a cold smile, had orchestrated a perfect plan. Force David to announce an engagement to Clara Vanderbilt, solidifying an alliance with the Vanderbilt family and restoring shareholder confidence post-scandal. If he refused, the board threatened to vote him out as chairman, stripping him of the company his father had built. Margaret sat at the head of the table, her voice sweet but cutting. "David, you've turned this company into a laughingstock with that girl. The board demands you make amends. Clara is the ideal choice. She has pedigree, influence, and most importantly, she's not a fraud." Clara, seated beside Margaret, smiled smugly, her emerald dress accentuating her sharp beauty. "I only want to help you, David," she said, feigning concern. "She's not worthy of you, and the whole world sees it." David, in a pristine black suit, maintained an impenetrable facade. But inside, he was raging. He thought of Ava, her smile while teaching, her eyes in the rain, the pain in her voice when she left the mansion. He'd called her dozens of times, but she hadn't answered. He knew she was protecting herself, but the thought of losing her felt like a vice around his heart. The board could take his company, but they couldn't take the one thing he truly wanted, Ava. "You want me to disavow my marriage," David said, his voice low and icy, his gaze sweeping over the board members. "But I won't. Ava isn't a joke, and neither am I." Margaret's eyes narrowed. "Don't be foolish, David. If you don't agree to an engagement with Clara, you'll lose everything. Power, shares, your father's legacy." David's lips curved into a dangerous smile. "My father's legacy isn't in the chairman's seat. It's in doing what's right. You want to make a decision? Go ahead, but I've made mine." The shareholder meeting took place that afternoon in a grand auditorium at Blackwell Enterprises, packed with hundreds of shareholders, reporters, and live TV cameras. The air buzzed with anticipation, every eye fixed on the stage where David would speak. The press predicted he'd announce an engagement to Clara to quell the scandal, and Clara had prepared a gracious acceptance speech, waiting backstage with Margaret. But no one knew David had his own plan. When David stepped onto the stage, the auditorium fell silent. He stood at the microphone, stage lights illuminating his face, highlighting the resolve in his gray eyes. Cameras flashed, and millions watching on TV held their breath, waiting. "I know you're expecting an explanation," David began, his voice resonant and clear, "about the scandal, about Ava Collins, and about the future of Blackwell Enterprises. I won't disappoint you." He paused, his gaze sweeping the room, then continued. "But I won't stand here and apologize for falling in love. I have only one wife, and she's teaching art in a public school in Brooklyn, inspiring kids every day." The auditorium froze. Whispers erupted. Cameras zoomed in on David's face. Backstage, Clara clenched her fists, her face paling, while Margaret shot to her feet, eyes blazing with fury. A shareholder shouted, "You're destroying the company for a girl?" David met the man's gaze, unflinching. "If this company can't survive without forcing me to abandon the woman I love, it doesn't deserve me. Ava Collins isn't a game or a contract. She's the woman I want by my side, with or without this company." His declaration detonated like a bomb, shaking the auditorium. Some shareholders shook their heads, but others, especially younger ones, clapped, swept up by his courage. David left the stage without looking back, leaving the board and Margaret in chaos. He knew he might lose control of the company, but for the first time in his life, he felt free. Meanwhile, at the public school in Brooklyn, Ava was teaching her afternoon art class. Her students, aged 8 to 12, sat around tables, painting their dreams. Ava smiled, guiding a boy and mixing colors, but her mind wandered. She thought of David, his voice when he said he didn't want to lose her, his hand gripping hers in the rain. She wondered if he was okay after everything that had happened. A knock at the door startled her. She opened it and froze when she saw David standing there, his white shirt slightly wrinkled, hair damp with sweat, as if he'd run the whole way. Behind him, a few reporters tried to push through, but school security held them back. The students whispered, eyes wide, curious about the powerful man stepping into their small classroom. "David?" Ava whispered, her heart pounding. "What are you doing here?" He didn't answer immediately. Instead, he stepped forward, his eyes locked on hers, as if she were the only person in the room. To Ava's astonishment and the kids, David dropped to one knee, taking her hand. The students giggled, some covering their mouths, but Ava saw only David, the man bearing his heart before her. "Ava," he said, his voice rough but clear, "I've spent my life building an empire, but without you, it's meaningless. I can't promise you the world, because the world isn't enough to deserve you. But I promise to spend my life loving and protecting you, if you'll give me the chance." Tears spilled down Ava's cheeks. She looked at him, seeing the sincerity in his eyes, the man who'd given up everything, power, prestige, to stand here in her humble classroom. The students began clapping, a few shouting, "Say yes, Miss Ava." Ava laughed through her tears, her heart overflowing. She pulled David to his feet, gripping his hand tightly. "I don't need the world, David," she whispered. "I just need you." He drew her into his arms, holding her tightly as the kids cheered. In that moment, there were no reporters, no Margaret or Clara, no contract, just David and Ava, two people finding each other on the edge of hurt and hope. Backstage, Margaret and Clara stood ashen-faced. Their plan had crumbled, and the board, though furious, couldn't deny that David's boldness had sent Blackwell Enterprises stock soaring, fueled by public support. James, lurking in a corner, realized his mistake. He knew David would soon uncover his role in leaking the contract, and when that happened, no one could save him. Ava and David left the classroom hand in hand, facing the reporters outside. But this time, Ava didn't tremble. She held David's hand tightly, head high, knowing that whatever the world threw at them, they'd face it together. The contract was over, but their story was just beginning. 1 year after that fateful night at the Crescent Hotel Gala, Ava Collins stepped into the same ballroom, but not as a trembling server in a homemade dress. She walked beside David Blackwell, her lawful husband, in a pearl-colored evening gown that shimmered like starlight, its tailored lines hugging her frame with exquisite precision. Yet the highlight on her neck wasn't diamonds or pearls, but the simple silver necklace her mother had given her, a symbol of her past, of the journey that brought her to this moment. Her hand was firmly entwined with David's, and as they entered, the room turned, gazes no longer scornful, but filled with admiration. The annual Manhattan Elites charity auction was a grand affair, drawing billionaires, celebrities, and the press. It was also the place where, a year ago, Clara Vanderbilt and Sophia Langston had humiliated Ava, spilling wine on her dress and making her a laughingstock. But tonight all eyes were on her, not because she was David Blackwell's wife, but because she was Ava, the woman who had risen above scandal and judgment to write her own story. David, dashing in a black tuxedo, leaned close and whispered, "Ready?" Ava smiled, her eyes alight. "More than ever." As the auction began, the ballroom buzzed with excitement. Precious items, from antique jewelry to yacht vacations, were presented, with bids soaring. But the most anticipated moment came when the MC, an elegant woman in a sequined gown, stepped to the podium. "Next, we have a special offering from Mrs. Ava Blackwell, an original painting by her own hand, titled Genesis." Ava rose, her heart pounding, but her steps steady. She had spent months creating this painting, an abstract work of blues and golds evoking a flower blooming from barren earth. It symbolized her journey, from poverty and humiliation to confidence and love. As the painting was unveiled on stage, the room erupted in gasps of awe. The MC smiled. "We'll start at $10,000. Who'll open the bidding?" A hand shot up instantly, a renowned art collector. $50,000. Bids poured in, the numbers climbing dizzyingly. $100,000, $500,000, then $1 million. Ava gripped David's hand under the table, hardly believing her eyes. When a philanthropist shouted, $2 million, the room exploded in applause. The MC turned to Ava, inviting her to the stage. Ava ascended, the spotlight bathing her, but this time she didn't feel exposed. She felt powerful. Taking the microphone, her voice was clear and confident. "I'm honored that my painting is so valued," she said, "but its true worth isn't in the price. I'll use every dollar to open a free art studio for underprivileged children in Brooklyn, where they can explore their dreams and discover their own value." The room roared with applause, louder and warmer than before. David watched from the front row, his eyes brimming with pride and love. In a corner, Clara and Margaret stood, their faces rigid. Clara, in a fiery red gown, clutched her wine glass, her eyes burning with envy. Margaret, impeccable as ever, forced a strained smile. As Ava left the stage, both women offered reluctant nods of acknowledgement. Ava returned a subtle nod, not out of arrogance, but because she knew she'd won, not with money or power, but by being herself. When the auction ended, Ava and David stood at the center of the ballroom, facing a barrage of cameras. Flashes blazed, but Ava no longer flinched as she had a year ago. She stood tall, her hand in David's, her eyes radiant. A reporter shouted, "Mrs. Blackwell, how does it feel to be the star tonight?" Ava smiled calmly. "I'm not here to be the star. I'm here to do what I believe in, and I'm lucky to have this incredible man by my side." She glanced at David, who returned a tender smile. As they left the ballroom, David pulled her into a quiet corner, away from prying eyes. He touched her cheek, his gaze deep. "Still the Ava in that old dress," he whispered, "the one I couldn't take my eyes off." Ava laughed, squeezing his hand. "And you're still the man who made me believe in fairy tales." That night in the Blackwell mansion, Ava and David sat on the living room sofa, the fireplace casting flickering shadows. A bottle of wine sat on the table, untouched. Instead, they talked of the future, about Ava's art studio, the trips they wanted to take together, a life free from contracts or expectations. "Ever thought of opening more studios?" David asked, brushing her hair gently. "Not just in Brooklyn, but elsewhere?" Ava nodded, her eyes sparkling. "Yes, but one step at a time. I want to do it myself, not lean on your name. David chuckled. You don't need my name, Ava. You shone on your own tonight. She leaned into him, resting her head on his shoulder. Thank you, David, for believing in me, even when I didn't believe in myself. He tilted her chin, kissing her forehead softly. I'll always believe in you. The moment lingered, warm and true, until David pulled her closer, his lips finding hers. The kiss began gently but grew fervent, as if they were releasing all the emotions held back for so long. Ava wrapped her arms around his neck, feeling his warmth, her heart beating in sync with his. They rose, hands entwined, and moved to the bedroom, where moonlight streamed through the window, illuminating a night of passion and fulfillment. The next morning, Ava woke in David's arms, sunlight filtering through the curtains. She looked at him, the man who'd forsaken an empire for her, and smiled. A year ago, she was the girl humiliated in a thrift store dress. Today, she was Ava Blackwell, an artist, an inspiration, and above all, a woman loved. She no longer feared the camera flashes or the world's judgments. She had found her place, here with David, in a love story she once thought belonged only in fairy tales.